Nobody predicted it would happen this fast. Not the analysts who spent the entire offseason debating quarterback depth charts, not the insiders leaking information out of Berea, not even the most loyal Shedeur Sanders believers who had been defending him since the moment his name got called in the 5th round of the 2025 NFL Draft. On May 19, 2026, the first day of Cleveland Browns organized team activities, something shifted. Something that you simply cannot manufacture, cannot script, and absolutely cannot ignore once you've seen it with your own eyes. A second-year quarterback from Colorado walked onto that practice field in Berea, Ohio, and in the span of 13 snaps, completely rewrote the story that everyone thought had already been written. And brother, nobody saw it coming. Before a single ball was snapped at OTAs, the Cleveland Browns quarterback competition had already been decided in the court of public opinion. At least, that's what everybody seemed to believe. The name dominating every conversation, every insider report, and every piece of offseason analysis coming out of the organization was Deshaun Watson. 3-time Pro Bowl selection, a player with the kind of arm talent that makes defensive coordinators lose sleep at night, a man carrying a fully guaranteed contract worth $230 million that is still casting a long shadow over the Browns' salary cap, a financial reality that, whether anyone admits it openly or not, creates enormous organizational pressure to make the investment work. Watson had been the story of the entire offseason. From the voluntary minicamp that took place in late April, reports were surfacing that the connection between Watson and new offensive coordinator Todd Monken had been genuinely encouraging. Monken, who brings one of the most quarterback-friendly, wide-open offensive systems in the entire league to Cleveland, was reportedly designing his scheme with Watson's specific skill set in mind. The system was built to maximize what Watson does best: working through progressions, stretching the field vertically, and using his mobility when the pocket breaks down. On paper, it was a perfect match. The media had already handed Watson the inside track. Sources within the organization were described as cautiously optimistic about his readiness. The sentiment in the building seemed to be that Watson, given a clean slate under a fresh coaching staff with a new head coach in Todd Monken, finally had everything aligned in his favor to remind the football world exactly why he was once considered one of the most dangerous quarterbacks in the entire NFL. The narrative was set. The script had been written. Watson was the main character. Someone just forgot to tell Shedeur Sanders. There's a particular kind of pressure that descends on a young quarterback during the first day of OTAs that most people watching from the outside never fully appreciate. You are operating in a brand new offensive system under a coaching staff that is still forming its opinions about you. The defensive personnel across from you are professionals who have been studying your tendencies, your release points, and your footwork since the moment the roster was finalized. The scouts standing on the sideline have clipboards full of checkboxes, and every single throw you make is being evaluated, analyzed, and discussed in real time. The veterans around you are watching to see whether you carry yourself with the kind of quiet confidence that earns respect in an NFL locker room, or whether the moment is too big for you. This is the environment Shedeur Sanders stepped into on the morning of May 19th. And what he proceeded to do in that environment was, by any reasonable measure, extraordinary. Over the course of 13 snaps, spread across a combination of 7-on-7 periods and 11-on-11 team drills, Sanders completed passes at a rate that scouts and reporters broadcasting live from the sideline described as being significantly above 90%. Let that number settle in for a moment, because context matters here. A 90+% completion rate on the first day of OTAs is almost unheard of for any quarterback at any level of experience. For a second-year player operating in a brand new offensive system under a brand new coaching staff, surrounded by teammates he is still building chemistry with, that number borders on the genuinely absurd. He wasn't just checking it down to safe, short options either. He was delivering in the red zone, He was throwing into tight windows. He was connecting for touchdowns in situations where the coverage was designed to take everything away from him. While Deshaun Watson took his share of snaps and flashed the arm talent that made him famous, the buzz circling that practice facility when the session wrapped was attached to one name and one name only. Shedeur Sanders had just announced his presence in the loudest possible way a quarterback can, with his arm. But it wasn't just the completion percentage that had people talking, it was the specific throws, and that's where this story gets truly interesting.
There are moments in a practice session that stop people mid-sentence. Moments where a coach, who was mid-thought, simply closes his mouth and watches. Moments where a veteran defensive back, someone who has spent a decade making quarterbacks look foolish, shakes his head and quietly acknowledges that what he just witnessed was something special. Shedeur Sanders produced multiple moments like that on day one. The one that had the entire cross-country mortgage campus buzzing took place in the middle of a 7-on-7 period. Sanders was working through a rep that had simulated pressure collapsing around him. The defense had executed well enough that an ordinary quarterback's instinct would have kicked in. Get rid of it, throw it away, take the sack, live to fight another down. That's the safe play. That's what most quarterbacks, at any level, are conditioned to do when their body isn't in an ideal position to deliver. Sanders' body was not in an ideal position. His back foot had planted hard into the turf. His weight was shifting backward. His entire upper body was angling away from the line of scrimmage at a degree that most coaches would use as a textbook example of what not to do when throwing a football. For a fraction of a second, it looked like the play was dead. But instead of throwing it away, Sanders held on. He kept his eyes downfield. He locked in on receiver Casey Conception, who was working through his route on the opposite side of the field. And then, with nothing more than a snap of his wrist and a flick of that elite arm, still leaning backward, still off his back foot, still in a body position that defied basic mechanics, he uncorked a throw that landed precisely where it needed to land. The ball cut through the coverage with speed, accuracy, and an arc that was simply not supposed to be possible given the position his body was in when he released it. Conception caught it in stride without breaking his route. The sideline erupted. Reports from scouts standing at the edge of the field indicate that one evaluator turned to a colleague in the immediate aftermath of that throw and said absolutely nothing. No words, just a slow nod. The kind of nod that communicates everything without requiring a single syllable. That throw alone would have been enough to make day one memorable, but Sanders wasn't finished. Later in the session, during an 11-on-11 team drill that represented the highest pressure situation of the morning, Sanders lined up under center with the first-team offense. The play call came in, a quick slant developing on the right side of the field designed to exploit a matchup that the offense had identified pre-snap. It looked like a potential touchdown if the execution was clean. The defense read it perfectly. A linebacker dropped into the throwing lane the moment the ball was snapped. The cornerback pressed hard into the route, disrupting the timing. For a brief, critical moment, it appeared as though Sanders had two choices: check down to a safe outlet or force the ball into tight coverage and hope for the best. Either option would have been understandable. Either option would have been defensible. Sanders chose neither. In a fraction of a second, he reset his feet. A slight hitch, deliberate, controlled, precise, kept the linebacker frozen in place just long enough. His eyes moved. Not a desperate scan, but a calculated, purposeful shift of his gaze to the back of the end zone where a receiver had drifted out of his initial route and found a sliver of open space. A minuscule gap had opened between the safety rotating over the top and the sideline boundary, the kind of gap that most quarterbacks don't even see in real time, let alone attempt to exploit. Sanders saw it, and he threw to it. The ball came out from a tight, compressed release point, not the clean, extended motion you see when a quarterback has all the time in the world. A quick, decisive dart fired across the middle of a field that was crowded with bodies and contested airspace. The ball threaded through the gap. It arrived on time, on target, and with enough velocity that the receiver could bring it in cleanly without adjusting his body.
The entire offensive unit on the sideline exploded. Even a handful of the defensive players, men who were professionally obligated to show no reaction when the offense makes a play on them, couldn't fully contain themselves. This wasn't just arm talent on display. This was football intelligence. This was pocket presence. This was the kind of trust in one's own ability that only surfaces when a player has genuinely arrived. And on day one of 2026 OTAs, in the most unlikely and unexpected way possible, Shedeur Sanders had just made an argument that was impossible to dismiss. The quarterback competition in Cleveland had just been completely upended. Here is the part of this conversation that makes everything from day one matter, beyond a single practice session. Deshaun Watson arrives at this competition with genuine advantages. This is not a small thing, and it would be dishonest to pretend otherwise. The experience Watson carries, years of navigating NFL defenses at the highest level, the football IQ that comes from processing thousands of repetitions against the most complex schemes in the sport, the pedigree of a 3-time Pro Bowl selection, all of that is real. All of that matters. Todd Monken's wide-open offensive system was reportedly constructed with Watson's skill set as a foundational consideration. On paper, the alignment between Watson's skill set and Monken's preferred offensive identity made the veteran quarterback the logical frontrunner. But football is not played on paper. Football is played on a grass field at the cross-country mortgage campus in Berea, Ohio. It is played during 7-on-7 periods, where defensive backs are disguising coverages and reading your eyes before you've even processed the snap count. It is played during 11-on-11 drills, where linebackers are flying into throwing lanes, corners are jamming routes at the line, and the entire defense is working in concert to take away everything you've been trained to do. It is played in those precise, high-stakes moments when the pocket collapses and everything you've prepared for gets compressed into a single fraction of a second, where you either deliver or you don't. In that environment, the real football environment, not the theoretical one that exists in scouting reports and off-season predictions, Shedeur Sanders walked in on day one and performed in a way that the Browns coaching staff simply cannot overlook. A completion rate above 90% is not something that gets filed away and forgotten when depth chart conversations happen behind closed doors. The touchdown throws don't disappear from the conversation just because Watson has more years of professional experience. The rope to concept, the threading of the needle in the end zone during 11-on-11, that evidence exists now. The coaching staff witnessed it in real time. It happened on their field, in their system, in front of their eyes. There is a version of this story where Watson's veteran savvy and established chemistry with Monken ultimately carries the day. There is absolutely a scenario where the experience gap between a 3-time Pro Bowl quarterback and a second-year player becomes the deciding factor when the competition intensifies during minicamp and training camp. But after what the Browns witnessed on May 19, 2026, that conversation is no longer a foregone conclusion in anyone's mind. The room has shifted, the narrative has shifted, and Shedeur Sanders is the reason why. To fully understand the weight of what Shedeur Sanders is carrying into this quarterback competition, you have to go back to April 2025 and sit with what happened to him at the NFL Draft. 31 franchises passed on him, not once, not twice, not in the first 3 rounds when concerns about system fit or draft board positioning might explain away the decision. 31 organizations looked at everything Shedeur Sanders had accomplished at the college level, the production, the accuracy, the poise under pressure, the leadership, all of that, and collectively decided he wasn't worth a selection until the 5th round of the draft. The discourse that surrounded that moment was loud, uncomfortable, and in many corners of the football world, deeply unfair. Questions that had nothing to do with his ability as a quarterback found their way into the conversation. Narratives that had nothing to do with what he could do between the lines became attached to his name. And when his draft position was finally announced, there were analysts who suggested it was entirely appropriate, that the 5th round was exactly where he belonged, that the teams that passed on him had done their homework and made sound decisions.
Shedeur Sanders did not respond to any of that with words. He responded the way he responded on May 19, 2026, in Berea, Ohio. On the very first day, he was given an opportunity to demonstrate his ability in a professional environment that was structured and organized and competitive and real. He went out and posted a 90+% completion rate, connected for touchdowns in the red zone, made throws that stopped scouts cold on the sideline, and walked off that field as the most talked about player on the entire roster.
He is not simply competing for the starting quarterback position on the Cleveland Browns. What Shedeur Sanders is engaged in right now is something much larger than a single depth chart decision. He is competing to force every franchise that passed on him to sit with what they chose. He is competing to transform his draft story from a cautionary tale about how organizations undervalue certain players into a defining chapter in a legacy that is still being written. He is competing to prove in the most visible and undeniable way possible that the 5th round was one of the most significant miscalculations that 31 NFL franchises have ever collectively made. Day 1 of OTAs was the opening statement of that argument, and it was a compelling one. The 2026 Cleveland Browns OTA schedule is structured in 3-day increments across the coming weeks, which means there are multiple additional sessions between now and the beginning of training camp in late July, where this quarterback competition will continue to develop and evolve. The mandatory minicamp runs from June 9th through June 11th, and that 3-day window carries particular significance. Minicamp is the first environment where attendance is required rather than voluntary, which means the competition becomes fully organized, fully documented, and fully consequential in terms of how the coaching staff makes its evaluation. Every rep matters at minicamp in a way that voluntary OTA sessions, for all their revealing moments, do not fully replicate. And then comes training camp in late July, the environment where quarterback competitions are genuinely decided. Pads go on, the physicality increases, the game situations become more complex, the mental and physical demands escalate to a level where the difference between a quarterback who is ready and a quarterback who is not becomes unmistakable and undeniable. Training camp has a way of clarifying things that practice sessions in shorts and helmets cannot. What Sanders demonstrated on day 1 of OTAs is genuinely meaningful. It has shifted conversations, raised eyebrows among evaluators who came in with established opinions, and forced people to reconsider narratives they thought were already settled. But he and everyone around him understands that a single practice session, even an exceptional one, is not a depth chart. It is evidence. It is a data point. It is a very loud, very compelling opening argument in a case that will be tried over weeks and months, not a single morning in May. Every session from this point forward is another opportunity, another set of reps, another chance to either build on what happened on May 19th or to allow the moment to become a flash in the pan that gets quietly filed away when the veteran quarterback finds his rhythm and the coaching staff defaults to the comfort of experience. The ball, in every sense of the phrase, is in Shedeur Sanders' hands. He has already shown in the clearest possible terms that he knows exactly what to do with it. Since the Cleveland Browns returned to the NFL in 1999, the search for a legitimate franchise quarterback has been one of the most painful, prolonged, and emotionally exhausting sagas in professional sports. The names that have cycled through that quarterback room over the years read like a masterclass in organizational frustration. Tim Cush, Kelly Holcomb, Derek Anderson, Brady Quinn, Colt McCoy, Brandon Weeden, Jason Campbell, Brian Hoyer, Johnny Manziel, Robert Griffin III, Deshaun Kaiser, Baker Mayfield, Case Keenum, then ultimately Deshaun Watson, whose tenure has been defined more by injury and absence than by the Pro Bowl performances that convinced the organization to make the massive financial commitment in the first place. 27 years, dozens of quarterbacks, and not a single one who has been able to walk into that building, take hold of that position, and become the kind of stabilizing, franchise-defining presence at quarterback that every successful team in the NFL is built around. Cleveland fans are not naive about this history. They have watched too many promising quarterback situations unravel in too many different ways to allow themselves to get swept up in a single OTA session without at least some degree of measured caution. They have been here before. They have felt this feeling before. The sense that something might finally be different, that this time the answer is really here, and they have learned, often in painful fashion, what happens when that feeling turns out to be premature. But here is what is different about this moment, and it is worth sitting with.
The throw Shedeur Sanders made to KC Knepsian while leaning backward off his back foot, that throw is not a projection. It is not a promise. It is not a coaching staff talking about a quarterback's potential in carefully worded press conference language. It is a throw that actually happened in a real competitive environment in front of evaluators whose entire professional existence is built around separating genuine ability from the appearance of it. The 11-on-11 touchdown in the back of the end zone threaded through a gap that most quarterbacks never even process in real time. That actually happened too, on a Cleveland Browns practice field during the first meaningful football session of the 2026 season. For a city that has waited this long, those moments carry a particular kind of weight. This is not a declaration. The competition is real, the road ahead is long, and Deshaun Watson is not going to quietly step aside without making his own case in the sessions that come. But something was started in Berea, Ohio on May 19, 2026. Something that felt to the people standing on that sideline like it might be the beginning of something the Cleveland Browns have been building toward for a very long time. Whether Shedeur Sanders becomes the answer that Cleveland has spent 27 years searching for, whether he is the one who finally walks into that stadium on opening day of the 2026 season as the legitimate, undisputed, franchise-defining quarterback this city has ached for, none of that has been decided yet. But after what the football world witnessed on day one of OTAs, the question feels more alive and more urgent than it has at any point in recent memory. And that, for a fan base that has carried this particular hope for longer than most, is not a small thing. It might just be everything. Drop your thoughts in the comments right now. Were you already a believer in Shedeur Sanders, or did today change something for you? Do you think Watson's experience eventually wins out, or is this competition already trending in one direction? And the biggest question of all, is Cleveland finally looking at its franchise quarterback? The floor is yours.